Yeah. Yeah, the other presentations might have gone a little bit more, but.
Are we good? Must be.
You're probably just start getting down
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me, or do you want me to use the microphone, or? I don't even want you to hear me, Jeff.
Yeah, you do a little bit louder or use the mic.
Okay. Why don't I use the mic? Okay, how's that? Better? All right, cool. All right, yeah, I'm Steve Fettig. My brother and I and my sons, we run Fettig Land and Cattle down there. We custom graze yearlings, and I've done this presentation a few times. It's been a few years since I've done it, so there's some old slides on there, a few new ones. So just kind of think of it as your favorite TV show, and it's a rerun. So we'll kind of go through that again and get through it. If anybody has questions, if I don't see it, just holler at me, and we'll take questions as we go through it. If there's something that catches your eye, we'll just kind of stop and take a look at it and discuss it. My son was out checking cattle one morning, took this picture. We live on the north end of Beaver Lake. It's kind of a neat place to live. That's the ranch headquarters. You can see the cattle in the background. At the time they had to come home for water, and they were trailing back out to pasture. Live on the north end of Beaver Lake, so we're kind of cognizant as to how people perceive what we do with the land out there. You get a lot of people from out of state that camp at Beaver Lake. If you've never been there, I've been told it's one of the best kept secrets in North Dakota. It's a pretty neat little campground if you're into that kind of thing. I'm not, but I like to go over there just to drive through and see it. It's a really nice place. It's along the west bank of Beaver Lake. They got cabins there. You can have camping spots. This is the ranch headquarters. When we were starting out, 1986, we took the savory course, and my brother and I, and we were running 180 stock cows. We had about 900 acres of cropland, and we decided we had to kind of do something different because the cropland wasn't really working out for us. So we were looking for something to increase our income and lessen the expenses. So after the savory course, we heard about all this cross-fencing deal and combining your cattle into one herd. We had 180 stock cows. We had them in 3 different herds, and we just kind of move them from one pasture to the next. So we were trying to get them combined into one herd, and we started developing some water points. The blue lines are the water points we developed. We added some cross fencing. We got out of the crop farming, put it all into hayland, and then we added 2 quarters of land up in the north end there. My oldest brother bought some of that, and we rent that from him. We added some more water points, and currently, just to give you a little history, we sold the cow herd. We had built that up from 180 head to 400 head, and we ran them all in one herd all year long. We fed them as one group, we calved them as one group, we bred them as one group. We were told you couldn't run 12 to 14 bulls in one herd like that and get your cows bred. We never told the bulls you couldn't do that, and it worked out just fine. In '97, we had that bad winter. We didn't plan quite as well as we should have. We ended up selling the cow herd because we ran out of hay. We had sold calves for $1.10. The market had dropped to 65 cents. Some of you saw that here the last few years. Calves are bringing $3 a pound, and now they're bringing, half that. So markets can play havoc with a lot of what you're doing. And you couldn't go to the bank and ask to borrow money to buy hay with 65-cent calves. So we sold the cow herd, and that's when we got into our custom grazing deal. So what do? We custom graze yearling heifers on 3,300 acres. We run anywhere from 1,100 to 1,300 head. We run them in one herd. We plan for 120 to 140 day grazing season. We've got 36 permanent pastures. When I say permanent, those are the pastures we have divided up with a single wire electric fence. All our fence on our ranch is single wire electric. We've got some double wire where we share a fence with a neighbor. And then we subdivide those with polywire and step-in posts into smaller pastures. Our grazing season runs from May to October. We plan for dry conditions, and we hope for rain. And while we're doing that, we monitor the grass growth, regrowth. Rainfall, of course, plays some with that, and then we monitor the condition of the range and the cattle. So when you're planning for dry conditions, you kind of want to determine how much grass you got growing out there. So how full is your feed wagon? If you're grazing one animal for one day, it's equal to one grazing day. Most everybody understands when you have cattle in a pen, you have to take a certain amount of feed to them cattle every day. Well, it's the same when you're grazing animals on pasture. You have to know how many acres 1,200 head are going to need for that day. And by doing this, we've got about 156,000 grazing days available. And if you divide that out by the number of days, that'll tell you what kind of how many head you can run. So here, for instance, we had just a little over 1,000 head. We ran them for 150 days. We actually ended up with a few more grazing days than what we had planned for. Some years it's a little less, but you kind of got to know what your pastures are able to feed the cattle. If you got a drought plan in place, you'll be and it rains, you'll be in a good situation. If you don't have a drought plan and it does not rain, you got a lot of problems coming. Stock density, we use the polywire to get the cattle in as small a bunch as we consider we want to work with. Here we've got 1,200 yearlings, and they're roughly on about 40 acres. Stock density has nothing to do with stocking rate. Stocking rate is what it takes to feed your animals through the grazing season. Stock density is how many animals are on a piece of land for a certain amount of time. That's kind of a dark picture, but they're 1,200 yearlings on another 40 acres. Why do we want to combine them? First of all, you get the dung and urine is more concentrated, so you get the natural fertilizer on a smaller piece of land. And when you move the cattle, they're onto fresh forage. They're moving onto that. And by combining them in a tighter area, you get them to graze pretty much all the plants in that area, so they can all the plants can compete together. Here we put them on 5 acres. They're on that piece for about 6 hours, and then we moved them. When we divide up the pastures, like I said, we just use a poly wire and a pigtail posts. And when we go to move the cattle, we just roll up the wire and let them move across. And we'll either leave the wire down, and they generally won't go back into that old pasture unless you're late on the next move. Then they'll go back to graze. But sometimes we'll put the poly wire back up and just hold them in that new area. This gives you an idea what the pasture looks like when we move out of it. If you look at the cattle's feet, you can see that the residue is about 3-4 inches tall when we're moving out. To make a grazing plan work, you got to have adequate water. A lot of people wonder, you know, we've had neighbors stop in and say, well, your cattle are all huddled by the water, I think you got problems. But you go out there, and if you got an adequate water system, you'll have cattle that are coming up to drink and walking away, and the other ones are coming up to drink. So it looks like there's cattle there all day long, but they're all taking a turn to drink. This is our normal setup, what we use for watering the cattle. These are fiberglass tanks. They're each 2,000 gallons, and we plumb them end to end like that. So it gives us about 80 feet of drinking area, plus there's 8,000 gallons of storage there. So they're generally not stressed for coming in for water. So my presentation was about healing the land. This is part of what that presentation is about. When we first started, we had the yearlings turn them out in this pasture. This is right on the north shore of Beaver Lake, and they had to go down to the lake for water, and they were huddled in this area just kind of hanging around loitering. So we moved the cattle out of there. And this is actually a 40-day recovery period on that. The growing season was really good to us that year, and even as wore out as that ground was, we were able to get quite a bit of regrowth on there and to start to heal up that gully. Then what we did in the future to keep them from going back out there, we put a fence up along there to divide that pasture up, get it a little smaller in size, less days for them hanging out by the lake down there. And that's kind of more what the condition is. That it's actually starting to heal up these cut banks even a little better. Again, these photos are from the 1999, and that's where the cattle were going into the lake to get the water. And that's a 40-day recovery period on that also. We have some years when we are short on rainfall, and 1999 the lake was pretty full, and 2012 you can see there's quite a bit of shoreline sticking out there. My dad actually in the 30s, it dried up so much that he was able to cut hay out of the north end of the lake out there. And then later on the CCC came in, they put in a dam and they raised the level of the water, and then it created all these cut banks around the lake. Here again, 1990, we call this the milk cow pasture. When I was a kid, we milked 40 Holsteins, and so we'd milk them cows in the morning. They get turned out, they'd go out to graze, they'd come home for water in the afternoon, they'd go back out and graze some more. We'd bring them home and milk them in the evening, turn them out in the evening, they'd go back out. And the shortest, easiest route to the pasture was between these two hills through this gully. And day after day, and you get a hard rain, it would just wear that gully out. So after we started doing some cross fencing and combined our cattle into one herd and giving these pastures some recovery time, we're able to start to heal up these areas. That's what it looked like in 99, 2012. I took this photo just the other day. So you can see we've got these cuts on the edges just about all healed up. These trails have all grassed over. This is all healed in here. We've just got, these are about less than a foot that we've got to heal back in those areas yet. So it does take time, but we can do it if we just give the land some time to heal itself. So why do we want short grazing days? On the right hand, we had the cattle in here. We moved them over to this side. This is a 4-day recovery period. You can see in 4 days the difference in color there. That's all regrowth, is why that is so much greener on that side. Here again, we moved the cattle out of this pasture. You can see the bite marks on some of these plants. That was bit off at about 3.5 inches. This is 2 days of regrowth on this big blue stem plant. And so it grew 2 inches, so basically 1 inch a day after we took the cattle out of there. So if we have our grazing days, say we want to leave the cattle in there a week, they're going to come back in here and they're going to take off that regrowth. And when they take off that regrowth, they're also restricting the root systems. And it's your root system that'll develop a healthier grass plant, develop a healthier range. It's your root systems that'll help build your infiltration, and all kinds of, your soil health benefits just increase with a healthier root system. You can't get a healthy root system unless you got a healthy plant on top. This is, I was driving down the road and I stopped to take a picture. This isn't on our land, but I thought, here's a perfect example of, most of our rangelands are overgrazed and overrested if you're not doing any management at all. You can see these hilltops got plenty of grass in, but this low area down here is where the lush forage is, and the cattle keep coming back there. It's a season-long use pasture. The cattle keep coming back. They graze off the regrowth. They don't graze the wormwood, and you can see the wormwood is pretty healthy, so I'd assume the grass in that low area is not very healthy. The grass is unable to compete with the wormwood. Here's another pasture not too far from our place. I had a yardstick in the pickup. I placed the yardstick out there. That grass is about as short as a golf green. So there's no way that grass root system can compete with Canada thistle in that area. And again, there's grass available to use up in the hilltops, but it's a large pasture with a small number of head. So the animals keep coming back to the regrowth, grazing off the regrowth. They don't go up in the hilltops to graze off the old forage. So we have overused and over-rested areas. We do have some Canada thistle on our place too, but when you combine the cattle into a large herd like that in a smaller area, they get to where they'll eat just about anything and everything. Here they took the tops off the Canada thistle. Here they're eating buckbrush. Buckbrush is high in protein, so why wouldn't we want them to eat it? Here's another yearling out there, went right to the buckbrush. Plenty of grass in the foreground it could eat, but it decided to want to eat the buckbrush instead. Here we got, this was a solid patch of buckbrush, and by doing what we do, we've gotten that buckbrush patch to thin out, we've gotten the grass to grow into it. Brush and those types of plants don't like a high animal impact, so they will thin out. And grass plants actually will thrive under a high animal impact under a short time period. You can't beat up an area like we did on the north end of the lake. You can't beat that up all summer long and expect the grass to grow back in like it did. It has to have high impact for a very short time. This is what the buckbrush will look like. They'll eat the tops off, strip the leaves. American licorice, they'll eat that. We've got some wormwood around the rock piles in different areas. They'll crawl up right up the rock piles to get it. If you look in the background, there's plenty of grass back there, but for some reason they desired to eat that wormwood. I won't bore you a lot with the numbers there. This is just rainfall history that I've been keeping track of. What you can pay attention to is the yellow numbers. I put those in yellow, anything that was under 10 inches. So just to note that we have these dry years occasionally. Whenever we have a dry year, you know, everybody starts screaming it's a drought and they want the government to come in and help us. If you plan for these dry years, you generally can do the same thing over and over again, and you don't need any help from the government. Just some more years. I didn't have the 15 and 16 for that. So this is just to the west of our place. This does prove that my neighbor gets more rain than I do. This is my neighbor's land over here. This is our land. This was a 2-inch downpour that we had in about 2 hours. And he got the same amount of rain we did. But you can see his creeks are running full. It's all running off his land. This is what his pasture looked like. He uses, he's actually got too many animals out there for the whole summer. And I went and took a picture in our pasture. We had no water standing in. Ours was all soaking in. So then I went down in the creek. His creek actually flows into ours. And the water in our creek was clear in 2 different spots. The water was about shin deep. And you can see my boot in the bottom of the water there. That was the water coming off of his land. So then I'm lucky enough to have his water flow into our creek on down into Beaver Lake. This is where the water was merging. This is the clear land from our creek. This is where his water was merging into ours. Burley County, JFIR has this rainfall simulator, and I just took a photo of that. I thought it was kind of a neat demonstration. Just to summarize that, they've got a grazing system, piece of soil in here, season-long grazing here, no-till planting, conventional till, and no-till with cover crops. And basically, the top containers are the runoff containers. And you'll see in the managed areas, the managed types of soil will have way less runoff than the conventional type. The bottom containers are infiltration. So you can see the managed areas have a lot more infiltration than the unmanaged areas. This was a study that they had done quite some time ago. They compared some season-long light use, season-long medium use, and season-long heavy use pastures. I don't remember the difference. I think this one's our pasture, and this one is Gene Govin's pasture. And those of you who don't know Gene, he does planned grazing also. And this over here is basically like a CRP field. So you can see what the infiltration results, the difference in managed areas versus unmanaged. I'll argue with anybody that says we have to have snow to make rain. I'll argue with anybody on that. This was in 1997. We had that 100+ inches of snow. April, we had a bad blizzard that set in. A lot of guys lost cattle. We had sold our cow herd before that, and this was the year we started custom grazing. We had 1.5 inches of rain in less than half an hour. And the next morning, so the day before, all this here would have been dormant, tan colored. There was no green in there at all. I should have took the picture before that. I didn't know it was going to rain 1.5 inches. But I expected to go out and see a pothole with water setting in right here. And there wasn't any. And I couldn't believe it, so I had to go home and get my camera and take a picture because this grass had already started to green up. So we infiltrated 1.5 inches of rain in less than a half hour. And this top picture is what it looked like 2 weeks later. So combining the cow herd, you get a beneficial animal impact, we call it. This was in 2012, I believe. I took this photo. It was a hot summer, dry summer, August. The cattle were standing up on top of this hill, and we moved them in the late afternoon to a different pasture. And when I move the cattle, I just go ahead with them, and I'll either blow a whistle or I'll call them if they're close by, and they'll just follow me to the next pasture. So they came off of this hill in a column, just in a row, and they were about 3 or 4 animals wide. And it took them about 20 minutes to all come off of that hill, but they all traveled down in this narrow width down through this hill. So what does animal impact do? This photo is in that green area where they all trampled through, and this is just outside of that green area. You can see the regrowth is much, the grass is more lush, more robust, a lot greener than that area that didn't have. Here again, it's the same year, same situation. The cattle were up against the fence, standing in the wind on this side, so they're pretty concentrated. You can see how much more lush this was. This was an old hay field we converted to pasture. On this side, the animals weren't concentrated in that corner. And I used my daughter as a visual on there. You can see her shoes out here. Here you can't see her shoes. And the treatment, the conditions on those two pastures were the same. We had the cattle in the same number of days, and the only difference was the concentration up against that fence. So the animal impact does play a huge role in the regrowth. That was a hot day. We got a thermometer in the house. It was 98 degrees in the shade. So I wanted to see what some of the soil temperatures were. We've got a gravel pit on our property. So I went over to see what soil temperature is on the gravel pit on bare ground. It's almost 115 degrees out there on bare soil. So I went over to that neighbor that had the runoff in that rainfall. Picture was taken at a different time other than that rainfall. But you can see how short that is. These are the manure paddies out there that you can see from the road. So there's very little growth out there. And you still have the cattle out there grazing. His temperature on that soil surface was almost 100 degrees. So then I went back to the pasture that the cattle came off of. You can see the kind of litter and residue we still leave out there after we're done grazing a pasture. And out there the soil temperature was about 85 degrees. At those types of temperatures, your soil microbes are still functioning. Once it gets over 90 into 100, your soil microbes pretty much shut down and don't do any good for you. So we try to keep our soil temperatures, our soil covered with some litter so we keep the soil temperatures down. The other thing is, from the cattle standpoint, if you get your cattle out on pasture that's soil temperatures are close to 100 degrees, how uncomfortable are those cattle versus standing on soil that's 85 degrees? 15 degree difference makes a lot of difference in their performance, I would think. This just kind of gives you an idea of the litter we're leaving behind sometimes. This is what 1,200 head will do on about a 40-acre pasture. And then they'll trample, you'll have some standing litter for wildlife, and what they don't leave standing, they get trampled down, covers the soil. You don't want any bare ground. Dung beetles, you want as many of them as you can get. They'll help break down your manure, cycle your manure into the soil. Does a lot more good there. If you're using fly control or insecticides, you're also killing off your dung beetle population. There's some larvae in the soil, in the manure paddies, that they're also in there opening up that manure. They'll create those tunnels in there, open up them shot holes. So if you see your manure paddies have those shot holes in it, you've got some dung beetle activity or some type of activity helping to break down the manure. When it's breaking down, it's recycling into the soil. We don't use any fly control. Another benefit to what I think is helping to heal some of the land too is getting some diversity out there on your land. These are some plants that will grow in there if you give them enough recovery time. There are also plants, not so much the silverleaf scurf pea, but these vetch plants are highly palatable. and the cattle will graze those off down to nothing. In a season-long use pasture, if you stay too long, they'll keep coming back and graze those off. You want to give those time to grow back in and recover. This is just a shot where some of those vetch plants grew in. This is another type, like a milk vetch type plant. I initially thought this was local weed, but I'm pretty sure now we're not having to have a concern with that. It's a type of a milk vetch. Lead plant. These are all legumes. They fix nitrogen into the soil. So why wouldn't you want to have those out there? You know, give them time to grow into your range, and let them help fertilize your soil naturally. Type of nitrogen fixers. Yeah, this here is 2012. We had 8.5 inches of rain. Everything was all dried up in July. August 1st, again that same year. We only graze our native pastures one time over through the summer. We will go back into some of our tame pastures a second time if we have enough regrowth in those. So basically, by giving the native pastures through the summer to grow, we basically have stockpiled forage out there for the cattle to go into. That's one thing I like about planned grazing, is I always know where and when and how much forage I have available to get to the end of my grazing season. I get paid by per head per day, so I want to get as many days on them cattle on the land as I can. Yeah, we just turned the cattle into that pasture there. So again, 2012, less than 8.5 inches of rain. I think this one I actually wanted to show you. There's really no flies in them cattle. You can see the condition on them cattle with the dry grass that they're eating. They're still in pretty good shape out there. This is what it looked like, what they were eating. There's really nothing green out there. I don't know, I was hoping this would show up a little better than it did, but if anybody wants to look this up, maybe some of you have seen it. Matt Maddox, he did, here's a new kind of BS degree. He did a little study on manure patties and fecal samples, and the crude protein and the TDN on manure patties. So if you've got a hard lumpy manure patty, you basically have very little protein. If you've got the washy, runny kind of manure, you've got way too much protein. So in 2012, eating that dry forage, we're at about the scale on its study of a 3. So we got 12 to 15% crude protein, 62 to 74% TDN. That's at the end of September. So the diet quality is still pretty good, just by giving that range some time to become a little healthier. Here's some of our gains that we've had on the cattle. As high as 1.6 down to 1.2 in those dry years. So I'm coming up to the end of it here. I guess if you're looking to get into starting some type of a grazing system, you're going to want to start with what you have available to you. We went from 9 pastures, so we're up to 36 what I call permanent pastures. We did that over the span of 32 years from when we started. So basically we put in 1 cross fence or so a year, you know. Add water as you progress. Water is a limiting factor more so than anything. If you can get enough water out to your pastures, you're able to plan your grazing season a lot easier. Observe the grass growth, like on that one slide where you got 2 inches of regrowth 2 days after the cattle are out. That's one reason why we want to keep our cattle moving ahead of the regrowth. We don't want them grazing off that regrowth. And then of course recognize the importance of the time that the cattle are in those pastures. And the infiltration, if you get your plants healthier, root systems healthier, increases your infiltration rates. You know, do you want to get 2 inches of rain in 2 hours and let it run off like my neighbor did, or do you want it to all soak in? And you know, some of this, what we've figured out is if you can minimize the stress on the animals, it'll minimize the stress on you. And I guess I'm about done if there's any questions. Josh.
Your cattle performance on your average daily gain, what time period, when did the cattle come and when did they leave?
Yep.
What was that measured? What was doing that?
Yep. The producer that we have that bring the cattle to us, we're custom grazers, so we don't own the cattle. We get the cattle from a gentleman in South Dakota, and he weighs them on the truck when they leave his place, and then he weighs them on the truck when they come back, and then he figures a shrink in there. He and I argue about the shrink. I don't think he takes enough, but he doesn't want to give me too big of a benefit on that. But so that's a time frame from his place to our place. He weighs them at his place before they get there, and then he weighs them at his place when they get back.
And when do they generally show up to your place? When do they generally leave?
Yep, we usually, it'll depend, like this year, we had a really dry, cool spring, so we were lucky and fortunate that he would hold them cattle off. This year we didn't take them till the end of last week of May. We've taken them as early as the 5th of May. Generally we're in that middle of May area, and we've had them as long as the end of October, and we generally try to get them sent back by the 1st of October. Anybody else?
Pipelines into your water tanks? You water like from one well and pipe tanks?
Yep, we've got a number of wells on the place that we hook up to. We use the shallow pipelines on a lot of them. We've got one deep pipeline that's 8 feet down. But most of the other ones, it's quick and easy and a lot cheaper. We'll just plow in the shallow pipeline.
You use a two-sided tank then?
Yep, what we'll do is, we should talk about that a little more, but we try to set up our tanks so that we can water a pasture on one side and not at the other side. And then what we'll do with the poly wire is we'll put the poly wire, let's just use this desk as an example. So this is a tank, and we'll water one pasture out of this side, say it's 80 acres and 80 acres on that side. We'll take the poly wire and we'll split that pasture up and we'll bring it over here. Cattle can use all this side, and we'll roll that poly wire back up and we'll put it over here, and they can use this side, and we can restrict them from going back to that pasture. Yep.
So if the signs are pretty obvious to myself and others in this room, why hasn't your neighbor changed?
That's a good question, yeah. You should ask him, yeah. A lot of people look at it as too much work. It'll take, if my son and I are working together, it'll take us 15 minutes to put up about a half mile of poly wire and take it down. If my son goes back to, he's at BSC now, so this fall I was doing it myself. And it takes me about a half hour to do a half mile up and down by myself. But they just look at it as too much work, too much management. But if I look at it, if I can increase the pounds of beef, the number of head I can run out there is more of a benefit to me. That's my job, that's what I do, you know. So if I can make myself money by running them cattle extra days, why wouldn't I do it? You know, I think they're just living in a box and they don't see that, you know. But also he's running too many cattle on that piece of ground and he could care less. So, yeah. That's a good question. We'd have to go back and ask him, you know. Maybe if I show him that slide where the rain is running off, he'd probably get it, you know. Yeah. Yep.
Steve, you actually got asked that similar question here a few years ago, and the answer that you gave kind of stuck with me, and it's a bit of a repeat of what you just said. You got asked, why would you do all that work when you could just turn them out? And your answer was, this is what my job is, and I get paid well to do it.
Correct, yeah.
And to me, that just really summarizes why you consider doing all of this extra work when, well, that's my job. And that was the best rate of pay for the other things that you could do.
Yeah, that's just it, you know, I mean, why do you get up in the morning? You get up in the morning just to do things as you've always done it? As the way Grandpa did it, as the way Dad did it, you know? My dad thought we were kind of nuts when we started doing some of this stuff. And he was at the coffee shop one day and the guys questioned him and he said, you know, I don't really understand what they're doing, but they got a lot of grass out there. So.
If you were to do a season-long custom grazing yearlings on the same amount of land, how many yearlings could you run? Estimate.
If I was going to do a season long,
Do 700?
I think we'd have to cut it in half. Yep, because we'd have to divide them up into the pastures. You'd probably run, you know, on a section, you'd probably run 150, 200 head on a section. And, you know, it sure as heck wouldn't look like what my pictures look like. It'd be grazed down and, you know. So yeah, we basically have doubled our herd. Based on your question, we've doubled our herd for what we can run for the number of days that we're doing it. Now granted, if we were going to keep them cattle longer, we'd have to cut back on the number of head. You know, how much feed is in your feed wagon. You know, if you got one stack of hay out there, you can't feed a whole lot of cattle. You know, so based on what you've got available, those are the number of cattle you can feed for a certain number of days. If you got one stack of hay and you only got one animal in the feed yard, you can feed that animal all winter. If you got 100 head in there and you only got one stack of hay, you're probably going to ship them out in a couple weeks, you know. So it's all based on time and what your grass growth is, what your production is. Yep.
Consider taking your yearlings in on gain instead of.
We thought about that. Yep. The question was, have we considered taking them in on gain versus per day? We thought about that, but if you're limited on the gain portion of the type of cattle they bring you. We're lucky, and this guy brings us pretty good cattle every year, and you know, maybe we could make more on a rate of gain. But if I got a year where he brought me some duds, I'd make less because they wouldn't gain as good, and that's not my fault. You know, it's not based on my management. It's based on his cattle performance. So if I do it on a per head per day, could I make more? Yeah, but I'd make less sometimes too. So you just got to find an average and live with it. Yep.
Steve, have you met all of your objectives, or are you still looking to improve on things within the system?
Yeah, good question. People still ask me, so you're still putting in water tanks and you're still putting up fence? Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're still trying to improve certain areas. We've got couple areas we dug pipeline in just this summer, and down to the north end of Beaver Lake. I was watering out of the lake. One thing I noticed when the cattle would come out of that pasture, especially during the late summer, they'd go into the next pasture that had fresh water and they wouldn't leave that water tank. They'd sit there for a day, sometimes longer, just sipping water. They wouldn't drink a lot, but they'd sip water because it tasted so good to them versus the lake with the warm algae covered water. And so they wouldn't go out and graze. They just sit there and sip water all day, you know. So it's kind of like, well, maybe that's not the best water. So we actually putting in a set of tanks down there, and another area that we had, the cattle were walking too far to get back to water, so there was trailing and stuff happening there. So we're trying to eliminate some of that, plus get water to another hay field that we're converting to pasture. Yeah. So yeah, it's always what next, you know. What else can we do? Yeah.
So with that, have you thought of fencing out the lake?
Yes and no. No, because why do I want to? Yes, just to keep them out of there, but what we noticed is our cattle don't loiter in the lake like a lot of cattle will in a season-long pasture. They'll go down, they'll stand in the lakes and stuff. We've never noticed that. They'll go down and drink, and they'll go back out and stand on the hill, especially if it's hot, and they'll go stand on the hill and catch a breeze. They won't stand in the lake. They'll drink and go back out. So do I want to fence it out? Not really, because then I'm going to get, you know, a lot of old stuff growing up around the lake, and this way the cattle can get up on the shore knock that old stuff down. And when the regrowth comes back, it looks a lot better, you know, for the people that are at the park and stuff. Yeah.
Steve, maybe Kelly, maybe you said this, what's the average days, or just the average amount of time you spend in
Yeah, it'll vary. Like that 5-acre piece, we were in there for 6 hours. That was just kind of a experiment we were doing. But we need about 20 acres a day for 1,200 head, depending on the year. You know, this year it seemed like we needed closer to 30. So that's what we'll do with the polywire. We'll give them about a day or two, depending on the terrain and where the water is. We'll give them about a day or two of feed for that day. We'll roll up the polywire and move them to the next pasture. So we're generally not in a pasture more than a couple days. Yeah. Okay, all right.
There's coffee and donuts for the break over there. Probably other things.
Thank you.
The question I didn't ask.
You drive somebody or what?
No. With myself.
That's all you can find now.
They only keep the best company.
Yeah, there you go. I should be. Yeah. Offend somebody in front and then you lost it.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steven. Where did they put it?
That's different. Yeah, I got mine. Yeah, we got a balance.
You want to load me? Yeah. Hit the stop button on that one. I'm recording yet.